Do you want to know?
I asked to join me Nadia Bilchik, our editorial producer, who is from South Africa, an anchor from South Africa. You know every piece of lingo. Help me out with this one.
Lekker. Now, lekker
can't
in
even say it.
Afrikaans means a
Lekker.
candy or sweet. So lekker is awesome.
But you asked me earlier about the US.
Yeah.
And you think about a lot.
We do take pride after.
Give less expensive gifts thinking I may just be having to do it in another couple of years. And then what about if you have children in the first 2 years? So they are saying they're going to be a proposal for children and possessions. But it's going to be very interesting. I'm going to be watching this one carefully.
The entire world has been monitoring the treatment of your grandfather, Nelson Mandela. And he was released from hospital on Wednesday. I know the two of you saw him this week.
Today we have our guest on the show, Nadia Bilchik. She is a television news anchor, keynote speaker, author, trainer, and communication consultant. She has a wealth of experience in interviewing well-renowned figures, celebrities, and corporations. Nadia is the author of 3 books as well, and she is the alumni of London Trinity College. And she has spent a very span career in news anchoring at CNN News Channel. So Nadia, welcome to our show, Ground Talkies.
Oh, thank you, Rahul. Delighted to be here. I love that we can be across continents in this age of virtual communication.
Of course, thanks to the technology so that we could connect and start this podcast channel.
Right.
So Nadia, tell me, since childhood, you wanted to do something in journalism, in news anchoring?
So, Rahul, I was one of those children who loved acting. So I think I was about 7 years old when I put on my first play in my parents' living room, and I made all the adults watch me perform. You know, some of us are very much extroverts from an early age. Some of us develop that. I don't say you have to be an extrovert. I have a family of I'm one of 4 children, and we're also different. But yes, I started performing at a very early age. But it was interesting how I got into broadcast journalism was I was actually in a movie with Gary Busey on the island of Skiathos in Greece. And I was playing a Nicaraguan terrorist. And I was being interviewed for the movie. And I made a decision that I would much rather be doing the interviews than be interviewed. I just sat there thinking, I want to be the one asking the questions. I'm not that interested in what I have to say. So that was my first insight into how I really wanted to be a journalist. And then in South Africa at the time, there was a channel called MNet television, which still exists. And I auditioned. And I think I auditioned in about September. And by October, November, I was on air as what we called a television presenter. So that's how I got into television. And there are many ways, right? But I was very lucky to have that opportunity.
That's really amazing. So if not a news anchor, you should be working as a Hollywood star actress.
You know, it's so funny you say that. I had visions of being it wasn't so much a star. I really loved acting. And in fact, the Trinity College of London, I did a teacher's diploma in speech and drama. But in the University of Cape Town, where I studied, I did 2 degrees. So one was English, journalism, and it was at the same time, when I think about it, it was very grueling. We had something called a performer's diploma. So I actually got a degree in acting and English. So I went to school to be a performer, and I was in lots of plays, and I was in 4 feature films. And Rahul, what people don't know about me is I've died in all the films. Gary Busey shot me in the act of piracy. I've had my throat slit. I've been shot. I have died in any way you can die in movies.
So that's how you bring all the glamour of an actress in this news channel studio.
Well, it's interesting about journalism because, in fact, yesterday a young man interviewed me on my road to journalism, and I had a different kind of path. Some people start out at broadcast journalism school. I came at it from a different angle. But the end of the day, for those people who are watching who want to be journalists, it's just having curiosity and interest in others and interest in the world. And this young man said, what advice do I have for people who want to get into broadcast journalism? I said, go out and do local stories and local radio or write your own pieces or create your own site or your own news channel.
So, like if we say in other words, like people watch your show because of your glamour or because of your anchoring.
So you say, I think that to be an authentic journalist, it's a combination of many things, but I think authenticity is so important. It's just being real and showing genuine interest. I think that's very important. And then we can't underestimate things like speaking well and, you know, really being understood. And I don't know, Rahul, if I told you this, but in South Africa, we had a show. It was called Essence Talkback. And it was predominantly, the focus was towards the South African Indian community. And I hosted that for many years. So I got to pronounce Aishwarya Rai many times, and all the Bollywood stars, because we used to show Bollywood movies and talk about, so it was just another part of my career. And in fact, on Essence Talkback, I got to learn how to facilitate an interview in a talk show style. So that was one of my first experiences.
So people watch your show, your news episodes most of the time. Like the old people used to watch that show just to know about the news, what's going on around the world. But the young generation watch the news just because of glamour. So maybe
I
that's
think
why.
there's a part of that. And why do people watch? I think people watch for a variety of reasons, but Rahul,
But
something
I'm saying,
interesting.
just because of your glamour, most of the youth are watching your show. Is that what?
You know, I think the younger generation, millennials, Generation Zs, they want very quick, they want very immediate. When you think of TikTok, how short it is. And I think people are looking for instant, and there's so many different ways now that we receive information, right? So for me, right now, I work as a global speaker and trainer in the area of presence and presentation skills. But I always try and interview interesting people. And why do I have an audience? I think a lot has to do with the topic. And right now, think about this, Rahul. You don't only get your news from watching global broadcasters. You get your news from Facebook. You get your news from Twitter. You know, there's so many different ways people get their news. But I do think that a lot of, if you think of people who become YouTube stars, right? It's driven a lot by personality.
So, like if we talk about your experience, as you mentioned about South Africa, right? So you have mentioned you were there, you had experience when Nelson Mandela got released. So, would you like to share that experience with us?
You know, so remarkable. First of all, I got to first meet Nelson Mandela in 1995. He had just become president, and I got to meet him. We were opening the SOS Children's Village in Cape Town. And it was so remarkable because I got a call at that stage. I was a very high profile presenter on MNet television. And someone said, do you mind being the MC? Nelson Mandela is going to be the guest of honor. And I got to go to the SOS Children's Villages and meet Mandela. Now, remember, Mandela became president in 1994, which is quite remarkable. And I was a journalist living through certainly the apartheid years and seeing his release. And what a privilege to be there for the first ever South African democratic election. Which is why I say to Americans, when you've lived in South Africa and you've lived during apartheid and you've seen Nelson Mandela 27 years in prison and emerge as this conciliatory leader, you also value your vote so much, because look what he went through to be able to have a democratic South Africa. So I've been speaking a lot to Americans about treasure your vote, appreciate your vote. Look what Martin Luther King went through, or other civil rights activists, to get the vote. So yes, it's impacted my life enormously.
So, if we talk about your experience as an anchor, it happens most of the time. I have seen lots of Hollywood stars. They work around with their whole team of makeup artists, their hairdressers. So once you,
I call them magicians, Rahul. Anytime, and believe me, I've been having hair and makeup professionally done since for the last 3 decades. And as you can see, I didn't have professional hair and makeup today. This is my own. But you really, I'm always so grateful. I call them the magicians, because you can see what we look like when we walk into makeup early morning. And by the time they have finished with the hair and the makeup, it's funny you should say that, because I was once doing a segment with TJ Holmes on CNN weekend mornings. And he happened to come into the makeup room early morning, and he looked at me. And then once I had all my makeup on, he went, "Oh, there you are." Because we all look quite different. So I can say good, skillful makeup really helps, especially as you get older.
So as you were hosting your show, Career Caffeine, so we already invited you to the Ground Talkies. When you are inviting us to your show?
When am I inviting you to come and talk to me on my show?
Yeah.
Yes, right now. Definitely, Rahul. I love, and also what I can do right now, which is so wonderful, is on various streaming platforms like Zoom or my StreamYard, I can go straight live onto Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. So I'm enjoying the immediacy of being able to do that. And yesterday I got to speak with Peter Yarrow. I don't know if you remember, there was a band in the 60s and 70s called Peter, Paul and Mary. They sang a song called "The Answer, My Friend, is Blowing in the Wind." That was there, and many other famous songs. And I got to interview him yesterday, and Deepak Chopra a couple of weeks before that. And I've interviewed so many wonderful people, from George Clooney to Meryl Streep to Matt Damon before he was famous.
So when you were hosting that show, that news channel on CNN, so how many hours work you were doing in a day?
You know, I've worked at CNN. I started off at CNN working for the CNN Airport Network. And I anchored overnights for the CNN Airport Network. And I always tell people, if they've ever worked overnight, it's a tough one. But people used to see me very early morning in the airport. So I started with that. And then I went to CNN International, and I hosted a show called Show Buzz and On the Run and Around the World. And then we did a money segment for Inside Africa that I hosted. And that was a lot of homework, because I really wanted to understand the various things that were happening. And although you always work with a team of writers, I still wanted to do my own research. And then when I started doing the segment for CNN Weekend Morning Passport, it was hours of research. I remember doing a segment, for example, on the Yazidi who were persecuted in Iraq, and just the amount of research. And I did segments on the World Cup, but it was hours because I didn't use a teleprompter. I would arrive and I would just chat to the anchor. And I remember speaking to TJ Holmes about everything from Easter to the Pope to the Greek debt crisis. So I spent hours researching so that I sounded very credible and confident. And occasionally, I always tell people, I once made a mistake and nobody noticed. Nobody except my mother. So I always tell people, don't be so self-conscious, because I went live on air and sometimes you'd fumble or make a mistake. And really I'd say, was that okay? Did you notice I made a mistake? And they'd go, no. And then my mother would call me from South Africa and say, I noticed you said X instead of Y. So
yeah, there is a very famous dialogue from a movie, like police doesn't know this pistol is empty. You doesn't know this pistol is empty. Only I know this pistol is empty.
That's so good. Exactly. So don't be so self-conscious. And really, Rahul, right now, so much of having spent 30 years in front of a television camera, I now teach people. A big part of what I do is teach people to network and teach people to do well in their virtual interactions. And I do a lot of coaching and group coaching and speaking around what we're doing now, which is, how do you look into the camera? Because although when you do a Zoom call or a WebEx or a Microsoft Teams, or you may not be in front of a TV camera, but you're in front of your computer camera. And learning to navigate that well has become so important during COVID-19.
And that's really amazing. Yes, you are absolutely right. So we want to the way you used to read the news for your channel. Can you, let's say, for example, you have to read the news for our show, then how you will read it and how you will tell to the audience about the show?
So please join us for Out of the Box, where we introduce you to fabulous people and topics who will help you think, connect, and communicate in a way that is out of the box.
Wow, amazing. That's great. Okay, so let's say you have you ever imagined you have interviewed lots of people and have you ever imagined that one day you will be getting interviewed by someone else?
You know, I've done both. I love to do the interviews, and I'm very aware when I'm being interviewed that I keep the answers comprehensive, but that I don't carry on and on and on. Because when you are interviewing somebody, you want to get your questions in, right? Which is what you're doing. So I try and really listen and give them something of substance and then not carry on and on. So if you notice, I try and end at some point. But I enjoy both. I enjoy being the interviewer, but it's also wonderful to be interviewed. And I have fortunately, Rahul, been interviewed many, many, many times on different topics. I've been interviewed on being South African. Yesterday, I was interviewed on why it's so important to vote. And I spoke to people about when you grow up in apartheid South Africa, which is 1964 was the year I was born. It's the same year that Nelson Mandela was imprisoned and Martin Luther King won the Nobel Peace Prize. So a lot of my adult life until I was 29 was spent watching the dismantling of apartheid. So I am very keen to tell people, treasure your vote, know your vote. So I like being interviewed. I get interviewed on that. I've been interviewed on when Nelson Mandela was ill. I did lots of CNN interviews talking about him. During the World Cup, I spoke about South Africa. There was a segment that I did where I spoke about various South African sayings, and people loved it. We got thousands and thousands of hits once it was recorded. We recorded it live and then it went on to CNN.com, and we got so many hits talking about certain South African words. And I'll tell you one right now. There's the South African word called lekker, and lekker means it's lovely. And how's it means hello. So if you go onto YouTube or you Google Nadia Bilchik, CNN, you'll see all kinds of fun things. One of my most favorite interviews has been talking about Joan Rivers. I was interviewed by my colleagues at CNN on why Joan Rivers was so adored. And it was so funny because that day, London Transport, the day she died, they put up a sign and said, this area is under construction in honor of Joan Rivers. So
is it like you have to wait once you wake up in the morning and you see today to whom I should give interview, or to today which interview I should conduct?
You know, I'm quite strategic, Rahul, because the people that I'm interviewing are usually right now in my life are around personal development and career and growth. That's what I'm focusing on now. Obviously, when I worked with CNN, and remember, I worked as a producer as well, a bookings producer, I would find people who could comment on various things. So if there was unfortunately a plane crash, I'd find the top expert in the world to talk about, you know, their knowledge around airplanes and their knowledge, their technical knowledge and what went wrong and black boxes and things like that.
You have completed approx 1,000 interviews till now?
Oh, many more interviews than that. I started interviewing people, as I say, for the Essence Talk back in South Africa. And then I did another show where we interviewed numerous people. And through my years, I've interviewed many people on such a broad variety of topics. So I'll give you a clue. I always tell people, if you are lost of what to ask someone in an interview, every human you interview has three things in common. They all have a past, a present, and a future. And something I speak about in my networking book is that if you run out of conversation with people, and that's from my years of interviewing people, you can always ask them how they grew up, what was their family like, what was one thing a grandparent or a parent taught them that stayed with them today. That's from your past. Then you can ask people, what are you doing right now? What's your biggest challenge at the moment? Then you can always ask them about their future. So I once interviewed a boxer. His name was Moses Sehwali, and I knew nothing about him and I knew nothing about boxing, but I knew he had a past, a present, and a future. So you can always, interviewing teaches you to have great conversational skills, and that's something I teach.
That's a great learning for me as well. Nadia, thanks for the wonderful tip. It's really amazing. So I think you should also get listed on Guinness Book of World Record for your maximum number of interviews till now.
Oh, I'm sure that Larry King has many more than I do.
Okay.
But you know what I think I could get in the Guinness Book of Records for is just reinvention and working in so many different areas. And that's my advice to people is, I started off at CNN as an anchor, and then I hosted shows, and then I became an editorial producer. And I teach and train and speak. And I think a big part of life role is the ability to just adapt. So COVID hit. On March the 12th, when COVID hit, I was scheduled to give about 6 in-person keynotes and training sessions on executive presence and leadership presence and networking. And all of a sudden that dried up. So I started teaching people to communicate via webcam and to be impactful. So that's a big part of what I do. And if any of your audience members, please go onto my website, which is nadiaspeaks.com. And if you fill out a form, I have informational interviews where anybody wants to find out about what I do or how I can help you or your company. Please reach out, because I work a lot with teams on team building.
Viewers who are watching this show, if you want to get trained from Nadia, you should reach out to her on her website. And Nadia, in the end, will you like to give a short message for the youth? A short message.
The most important thing is that you don't let fear stop you. So I have a TEDx talk called Own Your Confidence. Please watch it, because fear very often is false events appearing real.
Amazing. Thanks for your wonderful thoughts and sharing your wonderful experience with us. It was really nice talking to you, Nadia, and I hope to see you face to face once this COVID things gets over.
Please, I hope so. Rahul, thank you for having me out of the box.
Okay, thank you. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
You too, bye.